Since Roe v. Wade was overturned, I've been trying to share stories that demonstrate how it doesn't just impact women who want abortions, even though obviously that is indeed the case and that's still wrong, but it also impacts women who want to have babies, but unfortunately they have miscarriages, and then in order to get the procedure to remove the fetus, doctors are really apprehensive about that in certain states, like Texas, for example, because they don't want to be accused by the Texas Attorney General of doing an abortion on a live fetus, since the procedure to remove the dead fetus after you miscarry is functionally the same type of procedure. So it absolutely affects women who don't want abortions necessarily. But on top of that, there's a new story that I wanted to read. Actually, it's not necessarily new. It's several weeks old, but I think it's really important. So it demonstrates a way that these GOP lawmakers maybe didn't anticipate. It affects women getting access to life-saving medication. We're talking about medication that is used to treat cancer, rheumatoid arthritis, even ulcers. Now, the reason why women's access to this type of medication, these types of medications in particular, is complicated because of abortion bans is because these medications could cause women to have issues with their pregnancy. So, in the event you have this medication and a GOP attorney general in Louisiana, for example, says, are you taking that medication for your illness, or are you taking that in order to have an abortion? Now doctors are worried about this. Pharmacists are a little bit more concerned about prescribing this. So let's get to the story here. So this is from the Washington Post. Medicines that treat conditions from cancer to autoimmune diseases to ulcers can also end a pregnancy or cause birth defects. As a result, doctors and pharmacists in more than a dozen states with strict abortion restrictions must suddenly navigate whether and when to order such drugs, because they could be held criminally liable and lose their licenses for prescribing some of them to pregnant women. Even if they can show their patients suffer from conditions such as rheumatoid arthritis, some doctors worry they could be prosecuted for prescribing such drugs to a patient with an unintended pregnancy. Such patients are also at greater risk because they can no longer seek abortions in their home states should they accidentally become pregnant while taking such drugs, no matter how grievous the injuries to the developing fetus. So just let that sink in. If you live in one of these states and you're simply taking medication so that way you're not bedridden with rheumatoid arthritis, it's debilitating, it's crippling, but you're taking one of these medications and now all of a sudden your doctor is saying, I don't know if I can prescribe this to you, because what if you get pregnant? Then this can affect your pregnancy. This could harm the fetus. And then as a result, you might not be able to get an abortion on said fetus that is damaged as a result of taking this medication. So we don't want to be responsible in the event this turns into a criminal case. Now, there hasn't been a criminal case yet, but we're not talking about hypotheticals when it comes to this access for women being complicated. This is actually happening right now. For example, Becky Hubbard, 46, has decided to get sterilized so that she can go back on the only medication that has relieved her disabling pain from rheumatoid arthritis for the last 8 years. Soon after the Supreme Court struck down Roe v. Wade, the Tennessee woman said she got an ultimatum from her rheumatologist. If she wanted to stay on the treatment of choice for her condition, a drug called Methotrexate, she was told she had to go on birth control despite her age and history of infertility. Quote, "It is frustrating as hell," said Hubbard, a former nurse who lives in Johnson City, Tennessee, now waiting to see her gynecologist. There are no reliable estimates of how many women like Hubbard may have had their treatment regimens affected under the spate of new abortion bans, but some patient advocates say they have received dozens of reports from people encountering obstacles in the weeks since Roe's reversal. Quote, "We were surprised at the sheer number of complaints from people with arthritis and autoimmune conditions who were having problems filling prescriptions for Methotrexate after the Dobbs decision," said Stephen Newmark, Director of Policy and Chief Legal Officer for the Global Health Living Foundation, a nonprofit that advocates on behalf of people with chronic diseases. So I want to touch on additional details from Becky's story here, because this story really demonstrates how absurd these abortion bans are, and more importantly, how far-reaching they are. So this is a woman who is now going to get sterilized because she believes that that's the easiest way to get continued access to her medication for rheumatoid arthritis. If she were not able to get this medication, she says that she would be bedridden because she would be in constant pain. But because of this medication, she's able to live a semi-normal life. Like, not everything is perfect, but without this medication, her life would be much, much worse. And what's really absurd about this is she's in her 40s, and her husband have been together for decades, and she can't have children. They don't believe that they can have children. I don't know if it's her or her husband specifically, but for 2 decades they've been, having sex and they haven't conceived a child. So the fact that she has to get on birth control is really insane, considering the likelihood of her getting pregnant is minimal, and also birth control affects her health. So she was on birth control before, and she felt like it wasn't right for her. It affected her health in a negative way. But now she's faced with this option. If you want this medication so you don't have to suffer from debilitating rheumatoid arthritis, you either have to get sterilized or get on birth control. This is why she's opting for sterilization. Do you understand how absurd this is? This is happening in the United States of America. We're not talking about some far-off, distant, newly democratized regime with, semi-authoritarian leaders who are, trying to cling to power and overreach and, clamp down on the civilization. Like, this is happening in the United States of America. Is that not insane to you? She has to get sterilized to get medication for rheumatoid arthritis because of abortion bans. If this doesn't get pro-lifers to rethink their stance, nothing will. And unfortunately, this isn't going to get pro-lifers. And when I say pro-lifer, I should call them forced birthers because that's what they are. So I want to correct myself there. But they will never change their stance, even when it comes to stories like this, because they actually believe that abortion is murder. That's how insane these people are. One more story here. Claire Eby, who lives near Austin, has taken methotrexate since she was diagnosed with juvenile arthritis at age 4. When she was 18, her doctors tried to wean her off the drug, believing she was going into remission. Quote, "Things went down south really fast," said Eby, now 26. She developed inflammation in her eyes, which led to cataracts. The medicine that stopped her eyes from deteriorating further was methotrexate. Your health can deteriorate rapidly and also permanently if you stop taking methotrexate, Eby said. "My vision damage was permanent." Eby said she takes birth control, but her doctors also recently added a pregnancy test to the routine lab work she has to undergo to stay on the medication, a change that coincided with Texas's increasingly strict abortion restrictions. Quote, "They hadn't done that before," Eby said. So women have to jump through hoops to get medication that they rely on so they can live somewhat normal lives. Because of these abortion bans. This is what the forced birthers did. Are you happy? Still feel really pro-life, making these women jump through hoops, forcing them to get on birth control, take pregnancy tests in order to get their medication for arthritis. It's just so barbaric, so cruel. Now, there's a couple of other things that I want to touch on with regard to this story. We're not going to dive back in, but there's a lupus patient mentioned in this story. Her name is Becky Schwartz, and the firm that owns her rheumatologist's practice, they put a pause on her methotrexate prescriptions. Now, she's lucky because she refilled right before this pause was put into place, but her life was in limbo. She was worrying, oh my God, am I going to be able to get this medication that I need to treat my lupus? A very severe autoimmune disorder. My sister suffers from this, and I know how serious it is firsthand. Now, on top of that, you have, in states with abortion bans, Walgreens has told pharmacists that they need to ask for diagnosis codes before giving out methotrexate prescriptions. Now, Walgreens is trying to follow the laws in these states, but at the same time, this is so cruel and so unnecessary. Now, I do want to point out here, as Marianne Price writes, anti-choice states are restricting methotrexate. It is available from Mark Cuban's pharmacy for 58 cents a tablet with no insurance. Now, it does say that a prescription is required, so if you're unable to have it filled by Walgreens, this may be another possibly cheaper avenue if you are one of the people affected by this. But again, I just want this story to get out there because it's so absurd. Like when we visualize abortions in this country, not everyone, but a certain amount of people, forced birthers primarily, they always visualize it as women just like flippantly getting abortions at like 8 months. It's so preposterous. Like they have a caricature in their minds of women, but that's not happening. Even the women who need access to an abortion because they want to have one, it's not some light decision. Almost all women, they view this seriously. It's not something that they just choose to do. It's a significant procedure, which is why it needs to be safe and legal and done by doctors, not in back alleys with coat hangers. But now, these bans are so strict. Republicans are so punitive, with these bounty laws and whatnot, that now doctors and pharmacists and corporations that provide prescriptions to people like Walgreens, now they're restricting access to medications that women need, even if it has nothing to do with pregnancy, but just because these medications can affect pregnancies. This is the world that we live in, America in 2022. It's certainly not surprising, but it's still absolutely cruel and disgusting, and I will never stop throwing stories like this in the faces of pro-birthers who pushed for this. You did this. Own it. Take responsibility for the pain and suffering that you're causing right now.